And it's a big welcome to the show, Marilyn Garson. Marilyn Garson is from Alternative Jewish Voices and joins us today. I'm not quite sure how we talk about the last 12 months of events between Israel and Gaza, but that's the reason for the context. So, Marilyn, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to speak.
Yeah, just while people are wondering and having a look, there's Alternative Jewish Voices, ajv.org.nz if you want to find out more about who they are, all those beautiful people, and more, I'm sure. So 12-month marking of Hamas going into Israel and slaughtering, murdering, was it 1,200 or 1,400? It's up that number up in that area, people, and kidnapping, a few hundred as well, taking them back to Gaza. I don't know. How do we reflect on that? How do you reflect on the last 12 months, Marilyn?
I find it more useful to reflect on a longer time frame.
Yeah.
Although, of course, the last 12 months is unprecedented. So I tend to look back on it by saying that for so long, let me say it more precisely. On the first night of the 2012 war, I was in Gaza living on the top floor of a 14-story building.
Wow.
And I was sitting and watching the chandelier move and hearing the explosions. And what struck me that I had not appreciated in theory is that Israel bombs unreachably. The Israeli Air Force could fly at will. They could have bombed during the day. They didn't need to do it at night to keep the children awake. There was no reciprocal fear of death to temper violence with any kind of mercy. And it was so enraging. I can't tell you how enraging it is to be unable to do anything. So I look at October 7th as the day that people on the Israeli side of that barrier were no longer out of reach. And these two worlds, the greatest power disparity on earth, they collided. That's what changed.
I was going to ask you at some stage, what's maybe the one piece of incorrect information that's gone out in the last 12 months? And the one I was going to suggest, you've already said that what's happening today didn't begin on October 7th. That to me seems to be the biggest piece of, I don't know whether it's dis or misinformation, but that people look to what's going on now as a response to October 7th. But it's not, is it?
It's not. And I think there is a related misconception that isn't as obvious as what you have just said. And what you've said is formative, didn't start that day. But it's a real power to say history starts this morning and nothing mattered previously. That narrative also has let Israeli spokespeople and Israel's advocates say that Hamas broke the peace. And therefore, Hamas needed to be responded to rather than seeing a series of actions. There was no peace. Gaza has only ever lived in the space between the wars. And peace is much more reciprocal than that. So October 7th was the day of an escalation. And I have to say, I don't celebrate anyone's violence. It's just not in me. Civilians should be safe. I don't celebrate it, but only a fool would have believed that the violence would only ever take place on one side of that barrier. So I think the misconception is that some kind of peace and normalcy had prevailed before that. Israeli opinion surveys for years had been approving of what they called conflict management and agreeing to pay the price of conflict management. But the thing being managed was deprivation. It was not a conflict, it was an occupation. It was a displacement. It was an illegal occupation. And that breeds resistance. So to me, That is the misrepresentation, that things had been okay until Hamas broke the peace.
I'm sure you've seen Mehdi Hassan talking to Piers Morgan. I mean, everyone seems to have seen that of recent days. And he seems to be able, I'm actually going to play a clip from that shortly. He seems to be able to nutshell this so succinctly. Like, one of my questions is, how do we acknowledge the war crimes that have been committed by Hamas while still standing up for the civilians in Gaza? And he seems to be someone who is able to say, without supporting the actions of Hamas, of course there's going to be resistance if you're an oppressed person. What else did you expect? What else did you think would happen? So I'm assuming you kind of side with that. That resonates with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's have a look at this little clip, because the other thing that Mehdi Hassan talked about, it's only about 60 or 90 seconds, is the root cause of the violence. We'll just play this and then I'll get your response to that.
Let's sort out what the solution is. Yeah. Let's look at the root cause of the violence. It is undeniable that the root cause of the violence is Israel, Israel's occupation, the genocide in Gaza. What did the leader of Hezbollah say? He said, we won't fire any rockets if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the president of Iran say? We won't retaliate for what you did to Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the Houthis say? We'll stop blocking ships if you end the killing in Gaza. Where do all roads lead back to?
Why would you believe any of those people?
I don't believe any of them. I'm Ronald Reagan.
You're citing them as if they're sort of gospel statements from people who have unimpeachable integrity.
I'll tell you why, if you let me finish. I'm Ronald Reagan.
A bunch of terrorists said, we won't do X, Y, Z if you do this.
I'm Ronald Reagan. I say verify. Call their bluff. If they're lying, call their bluff. Stop the Gaza fighting and then see what happens.
Yeah, but Israel has called Hamas's bluff.
When?
There was a ceasefire in place before October the 7th.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
It's fundamentally false. They were attacking Palestinians the week before October the 7th. In September, you can Google it on that tablet. What's your definition of a ceasefire?
Well,
Israel gets to attack people and not the other way around.
Okay.
In September, hold on. In September, you just made a charge that's not true. There's a tablet there. You can Google it. Guardian headline right there. You can go see the news report.
I don't Google during interviews.
Well, afterwards, everyone can. There's a Guardian headline, September 2023, a month before October the 7th. The headline is Palestinians shot in the ankles by Israel in Gaza, attacked. There were airstrikes in Gaza. And by the way, Gaza is not isolated. Gaza and the West Bank under international law are one entity. There were several hundred Palestinians killed in the West Bank before October.
But my point to you, Mehdi, is...
So there was no ceasefire. You just can't say... It's just not true.
They would say there was a ceasefire.
And it's not true.
We'd say otherwise.
The facts say otherwise, please.
There you go. So that's Mehdi Hassan and Piers Morgan. I don't know if you have or haven't seen that, but I'd love to get your response to what Mehdi was saying.
I completely agree. It's not the question of the character of Nasrallah. That's not the question here. The question is, when people say, I'm fighting for this reason, why should you believe people of the sterling character of Benjamin Netanyahu and disbelieve everyone who happens to be, what, Arab, Muslim, not Jewish? Why is there a presumption of truth and a presumption of falsehood? I'm completely on his side. And he is not at any point glorifying the fact that now more people are flinging more weapons at more urban centers. That's not good. We want less of that. But if they tell you how to stop the violence and you say, no, let's just do more violence, that doesn't add up to me.
You have been in Gaza, I guess, of recent times, certainly in the last 10, 15 years. Do you think if what Mehdi Hassan just said, stop it, and they'll stop it, Hamas would stop?
That's kind of an interesting question. I think that Hamas, what remains of Hamas is, of course, a different entity after a year of this. And it's never been entirely clear how much of Hamas knew what was about to happen on October 6th. So I don't know any more than anyone else knows about what remains of the chain of command and so on. But with all of those caveats, it seems to me that if Israel's violence stopped with a clear path to something better, then it's hard for me to believe that the people of Gaza would not do everything in their power to ensure that reciprocally the violence stopped while a path of goodwill was being followed. Right?
It's the goodwill, eh? How do we get the goodwill?
It's got to be external.
Yeah.
Because what that interview was not discussing was the credibility of Netanyahu and the people who wag his tail in his cabinet. You want to doubt that Hamas is a goodwill interlocutor? Why should you assume that Israel has goodwill interlocutors in its government?
Yeah.
It's got to come from without. I don't doubt that. The people who are exiting from Israel appears to skew the population toward the extremes. The people who are staying and approving of this action are the more extreme parts of the population. The people who are protesting are not really protesting out of concern for Palestinians. They are protesting out of questions of their national character, of their own government and their own choices, not regarding what their government is doing to others. So I don't see where change happens from within Israel at this point. But I certainly see how to impose change. And that comes from without. That comes through all the kinds of nonviolent economic choices that we can enact all around the world. And it comes from a few critical military and financial backers saying, it's really far enough now. Now you stop.
Within that interview, there is a lot of Mehdi Hassan saying, why would I believe Netanyahu? Israel's lied for 12 months. So that does come up in other parts of it. I don't know. I don't think we can solve these problems, Marilyn. If we could, we would have solved them a long time ago. But Christopher Luxon was in Dunedin recently. And he did a stand up to the media, and the first thing he said was, commemorating the 12-month anniversary of October the 7th, et cetera, and offering his, he didn't say thoughts and prayers, but it's that kind of vibe. And then at the end of it, he went two-state solution. And it feels so strange that there are a bunch of people, I don't know whether they're Zionists or they're just fans of Israel I don't know where that line would be exactly, who are saying Israel has the right to defend itself. We support Israel. We want a two-state solution. But that's not what Israel wants. Israel doesn't want a two-state solution. How do we traverse that conversation when even the people who seem to be, for want of a less clunky line, on Israel's side, are getting to a point, two-state solution, that Israel doesn't want?
Right. So I would say that many of the people you've described, the people that you've described include many Christian Zionists.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
The majority of Zionists are Christian. So I don't think they're one bit concerned with what Netanyahu wants, because what they want is not being fully stated when they speak.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I'm not sure that anyone has ever simply conceded power of the caliber of Israel's power, and we should not expect that to change. I think it's much harder to envision the path after this year, and very possibly someone just needs to stand in between them for a time, because after this kind of conflagration, the hard feelings aren't going to go away suddenly. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it needs to come from without, because when we talk about Israel and Israel's future, it seems to me that we are talking about two different things under the same name. One is the collective aspirations of a community of people, and the other is a regime of power. And people have rights, right? The people who live between the river and the sea, they all have a right to participate in decisions about how they're governed. We know that. Therefore, the current regime of power, a regime of power does not have rights. This regime of power has delegitimized itself grotesquely with its actions. Perhaps if a few of them were sitting in jail cells in The Hague, that would help to decapitate the snake. And change may have to be imposed on a minority. So do it.
Do you know of a way for, so when people tend to say, you know, when people side with, for want of a better word, the people of Gaza, the citizens of Gaza, not Hamas, but the citizens of Gaza, it's very, very common to hear within various circles, oh, you know, so you're hanging a terrorist flag. Look at that person wearing a terrorist shawl. You know, should we care? Should we care that people are overstating and calling others anti-Semitic and that kind of stuff just because they're trying to fight for the people, citizens, civilians of Gaza? Is there a way around that to make that messaging better so more people will hear it without getting called anti-Semitic? Or is it just, we just got to do what we've got to do and don't care about what those opponents throw at us?
I think a big part of the answer is leadership, not only our government, but institutions around our country. They need to be standing up and saying, here are the moral anchors. Here are the principles. Here are the principles that let us speak. And the principles are international law and civilian protection. And they need to help set, because they have the stage, they have the microphone. They need to help set the terms that let people speak more wisely and be critical consumers of the misinformation that they hear. And it is my view that the Jewish community in particular has been held up as an obstacle by a few people who aggressively speak the way that you've just described. And we need to dismantle that, because that is a way of preventing normal conversation about a war that people care about an occupation that people care about.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think I could probably talk to you for an hour about this, but it feels like it's an okay place just to leave it off there. But one more thing before we go. You are about to release a book, Jewish, Not Zionist. Tell us a bit about the book, where people can see it, where they can get it, etc., etc.
It's coming out in 2 weeks, and it is my attempt to open this normal conversation by helping people to distinguish Jewish from Zionism, by talking about what happens here, not in New York, not in London, but here in Aotearoa. What happens when Jews stand up? How can people speak about these issues without worrying that they're offending the Jewish community? I've told that story, and I've tackled those big questions in a very local way. And I hope that's a way to open up the much more normal conversation about policy, about activism, without the fear that people really feel around this issue.
Well, when that gets released, we'd love you to come back and have a talk to you about your book. That'd be lovely. But as for today, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk again super soon.
Thank you very much for the time. See you again.